This is the bundle of wires in the schematic that goes to the rear brake light, the rear signal lights, and the license plate lights. I'm going to cut through the electrical tape here so that we can expose the individual wires and that I can get access to the rear license plate light to use as the control wire.
Okay, as I said, we've got this light goes to the signal lights, this to the rear and brake lights, and then I removed the electrical tape that combined these two together, and and now we can see them exposed. This yellow. This yellow and this yellow wire both go to the license plate light and the rear light, respectively. What I'm going to do here, and this is the moment of truth, because because now I'm doing actual irreversible change. I'm going to cut this wire and just make sure it's switched like I believe it is. So as I said, this just like we saw in the schematic, this is the license plate light, and I have everything off right now. So I probably won't get electrocuted. And now I just need to strip this off a bit. This looks like it's 18 gauge wire. And we've almost got it. I just don't want to do any damage, any more damage than I need to. So there, we stripped off the insulation. And what I'm going to do now is just make sure that it is a switched wire. As you can see here, we have, as you can see here, we are reading 0 volts, and I'm going to attach that to this yellow, to the yellow wire right here, and it still reads 0 volts because nothing's on. Now when I turn on the ignition, there you can see that we're reading 11, 12 volts now. So, and now that I've turned it off, we're back down to 0. So we can see it does what I want to do. That's great. And let me turn my multimeter off now. Okay, I'm back. As you can see, I've stripped off both ends of the split control wire right here. And what we're going to do is splice in a third wire, and I'm going to use that to connect to the relay. So let me see. First, let me just tighten up the threads there. And once again, always remember, put on the insulation first. The heat shrink insulation here, so I've got that over. And this first wire is going to go into this end of the butt connector. And let me just get my crimp tool. And then we'll just crimp that in. Now, honestly, I wish these things had some kind of, connectors so that I could have, sort of disconnected these and done all this splicing at my desk. But unfortunately, I can't. So, I've got to do this all in situ, right here on the, right here where the equipment is. It's not the way I would have wanted it, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. It's easier than being a surgeon, I guess. All right, so I've crimped that down. Maybe I need a little bit more crimping just to make sure it's not going to move. Obviously, like before, I'm going to solder it as well, just to get that extra, extra firm work in there. Okay, so how is that doing? I'm going to give that one more try. I really have to squeeze these harder than I thought, but there we go. I feel that's pretty tight in there for now. And then I'm going to splice it with this blue wire here. So just combine these together. I'll just combine the threads here together like this, right? And what I might do actually is solder that joint. Let me just see how this goes. Let's test a couple things out. This seems to fit in okay. What I'm going to need to do is, wrap these together and wrap it tight enough so that it ends up fitting into the other end of the butt connector. So let's just take these. I'm going to interweave the wires with each other. I might go so far as to, interweave these like this. Now, if I feel that's pretty good, what I might do here is probably solder those together just to make sure it stays. Let me just make sure this is going to fit into the butt connector. Which it does, that's good. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is crimp these together with the butt connector, and then I'm going to solder it all together. This is another case where the helping hand is gonna come in handy. So I've got it holding that butt connector in for me. I've got it holding the butt connector up for me. Let me just slip this in. I think that's as good as I can do for now. And while I've got that in, I can crimp it together. So pop this in as best I can, then crimp it in with the crimp tool. And there we have it. As I said, I'm kind of in close quarters here, but I've got this together. This isn't the most beautiful thing in the world, but what I'm gonna have to do is solder this joint together and solder both the joints together. And from there, I will end up, and then I'll put the heat shrink over. And right now, I'm just waiting for this to heat up here. Unfortunately, there's a lot of plastic in the way. That's going to cause some more trouble, but I'll just have to deal. I'm not really happy here. I think I used too large of a gauge of wire to combine with the this yellow wire, but in the end, I don't think it'll be that big of a deal. But if I could do it over again, this is 14 gauge wire. If I could do it over again, I'd probably use 18 gauge wire and combine those maybe, and then, you know, maybe use a smaller kind of butt connector, because this is a much thinner wire than I expected actually. Problem with, you know, automotive applications is that there's going to be a lot of vibration. That's what I worry about. And so you can't just use kind of standard, you know, you can't just twist things together. You do have to be aware of things, you know, issues like moisture and vibration, and be extra careful with what kind of, you know, connectors or splices you're using. So what I'm going to do now is ensure that I don't make the same mistake I did last time, and I'm going to wait until this cools down so the heat shrink doesn't shrink around it as I move it over. Okay, so this is cooled down. So let me just move over this the heat shrink and cover everything up. All right, that's looking good. And I'll just turn on my heat gun, and that should take care of it. Okay, and here's the splice. So that's looking all pretty good right now. Okay, let me just you know, turn on the key ignition and make sure everything's still working. All right, and the license plate light is still on, so I at least haven't done any damage. Okay, so here we are, and the next step is to connect this spliced wire to the control wire of the relay. As I said, I've got this convenient wire harness that came with my relay, so that makes it you know, pretty easy to set up. I don't have to make any manual connections, and it comes with, and the instruction manual showed that the pin 86, which is that control wire, is the white one. So what I'm going to do is splice the white wire in the harness to the blue wire I used for the splice. Okay, so here we are, the same thing. I'll just put this here in the splice. Use my crimp tool to crimp that in. Now, because you should never forget this part, I'm going to grab the some insulation, shrink wrap, and put that over the splice first. There we go. And you know, as like usual, I'm going to solder this together. Okay, so as usual, I've got my helping hands. I'm heating this up. I heated it up a bit before I turned the video back on, so it's going to seem easier than it really is. And let me just get some solder onto those wires and the butt connector, and I'm gonna say that is a success here. So I'm trusting that's a pretty good, you know, good connection. Okay, and now I've got the control wire, the white control wire for the harness for the relay, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just put this into the butt connector, crimp it good, crimp it real good. And now that that's there, it might be a little difficult to, you know what, let's see, it might be a little difficult to solder shut, but I'm gonna, you know, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a little solder in there, and hopefully it'll flow into the joint. Okay, so I've heated that up, and now as I put in this solder, that'll flow in there, and just keep that joint nice and tight, and make sure, you know, it'll be pretty solid. Okay, so now that that's all set, this seemed like it cooled down. You know, my hands aren't burning when I touch it, so now I can just put this, put the shrink wrap over it, and once again hit it with my heat gun. All right, looking good. Okay, so after I finished everything up, so after I made those last few connections, I wired up the rest of the relay, and I'm going to show you what I did. First of all, the wire that goes directly into the wire that goes to the battery starts with this blue wire here, and then I spliced it over. Then I spliced it over to remember the inline fuse wire, which I've run under here. The fuse is further down, in this corner, right over here. Ran it underneath here and into the positive terminal. The black wire goes to ground. Also took that from here, ran that underneath and all the way around, and then plugged it in, and then screwed it into the terminal here. And then as you remember, we've got the white wire, which is that control wire that I spliced into the rear light. I spliced into the license plate light over here. So that leaves the last wire, which is the output. And this is the wire that we want to have full power go to when I turn the key. So let's see how that works. As you can see, I've hooked that up here. So we've got the yellow wire. I've got a little round terminal here, and I've hooked that up to the positive terminal of my multimeter, which currently is reading 0 volts. So what I'm going to do here, right by my keys, is turn the key, and what should happen is that we should see a voltage. And there you go. So we're seeing voltage run through the multimeter because we have a signal on the terminal. And then when I turn it off, it's gone. So that's exactly what I wanted. Now, the exciting part, which is that what I've got is connectors for a pair of Oxford heated grips, and which are here. They're actually pretty nice. I haven't hooked them up yet, but what I do have is the wire harness that goes into them. This is the wire terminal that ultimately feeds into the heated grips. Remember what I said about how that fuse I had was basically a main fuse, kind of a terminal fuse that that was kind of the fuse of last resort. All of these other things are themselves fused. So this, for example, let's open this up for a second. This itself has an orange fuse, and I don't know how many amps orange fuses are. I'll have to look that up later. But that itself has its own fuse. So what I'm going to do, so instead of having this connected to the battery where it's drawing power all the time, obviously the end goal here was to have it only turn on when it gets a signal from when I turn on the ignition, when I turn the key. So the next goal is to connect these two terminals. Okay, so eventually my goal is going to be to have a separate accessory harness, but for now I just want to connect this terminal, which comes out of the relay, to this terminal, which is what I'm using for the heated grips. And I want them to fit. I want them to fit close, and but also I want to be able to take it off. So in this case, I'm not actually going to solder, use a butt connect or anything. Instead, I'm going to use something similar to the way the battery works. I'm going to use a screw and a nut. So I'm going to screw these together. I think I'll put this on, I think I'm going to put the relay output on the bottom and then accessories on the top. Put those together. Screwing this nut really good. Make sure everything is off at this point. I guess I shouldn't have to say that, but that's really a good idea. And then, just for safety's sake, I don't want this to short out. I don't want any problems to happen. I don't want anything to catch on fire. I'm going to just cover this up in some electrical tape. Now, eventually, I'm going to have some sort of accessory harness, and it's going to be safer, and it's going to take a lot more accessories. I won't have to undo the electrical tape every time I want to add something, but this will be good for now. Okay, so what I've done here is plug in the controller for the heated grips. I still haven't hooked up the heated grips. That's not really necessary now. What I want to show is that this is working with the controller. So, as you can see, none of the lights are on. It goes 30%, 40%, 50%, 75%, 100%, and plus and minus buttons to heat up the grips. So when I turn the keys, what we can see is that they're operating when I press up and down. Now, and then when I turn it off, the light is out, and I can press up and down and nothing happens. So there we go. We succeeded. This is the setup I have with with all the wiring. I think I'm going to have to kind of move some things out of the way and retape some things. But here's the wire harness. Here is the relay. And I've tried to move the wires out of the way. I kind of use this space to store things like a manual and some registration information. So I'm gonna have to keep this out of the way, but for now it's working great. I'm also gonna have to retape these wires together, make sure nothing happens to them. But I'm gonna call this a success.